Back in my last theory video, I suggested that the retcon in the Five Nights at Freddy's story was the existence of Remnant, but in that thumbnail I showed a picture of Ennard in Shadow Freddy without actually going into why I chose those two characters to represent the difference between Agony and Remnant. Well, to put it simply, I think they were both created by Bite Victim, or Crying Child, whoever you want to call it. That's right, no more Golden Duo in this house, toots. This series only has one Golden Freddy, and that's our good pal, Cassidy Cassidy. Just Cassidy. But let's actually dissect what I think the Crying Child is, his story, and how it's tied to the missing children's incident. Crying Child, growing up, like all the other Afton children, was devoid of attention from William. Rather, the responsibility of watching him was shoved onto Michael. Michael, being a young boy wanting to spend time with his friends, understandably grew tired of having to take care of his brother constantly, attempting to leave him home alone, or at Fredbear's. Crying Child would become fond of the Fazbear characters, and ends up with plushies of the Core 4 and Fredbear. The Crying Child begins to give these characters the personalities from the characters of the cartoon, in particular Fredbear, who he carries with him always. Despite loving the characters, he's scared of the actual animatronics they are based on, more so caused by employees climbing in and out of the Springlock costumes. This gives the idea that the employees are being eaten. Crying Child isn't the only one who catches the sights of the Springlock costumes, as rumors start to spread amongst children that, hey, kids are getting stuffed into these things. And this culminates in him not wanting to get caught by the animatronics, terrified it will end up eating him. This character even shows up in his nightmares. Leading up until his birthday, Michael's pranks get worse and worse, until the day finally comes. Michael and his friends have had it with Crying Child being a crybaby, and so they pick him up and get him close to the performing Fredbear. His crying and squirming just make the boys keep the charade going, getting him closer and closer until he's inside Fredbear's mouth. That's when the animatronic's mouth closes, biting his head. In his fleeting time of life, the Crying Child relives the week inside of his head over and over and over again. This is until everything fades to a void, as he's told that the characters are still his friends, and that Fredbear will put him back together. And he dies. Or at least his physical body does. Pieces of him are spread amongst the plushies, as they end up also getting confiscated by William. See, the stuffed animals, most notably the Fredbear plush, had created something. The monsters the Crying Child had seen in his nightmares had become real, as a shadow of the machine that took his life was created. A being created of the agony of the Crying Child's death. The piece that made William realize that his son had created life. Whether it was out of a need to feel powerful, or to create something worthy of loving, maybe even an attempt to keep himself alive, or perhaps a mixture of them all, William started an experiment, utilizing the stuffed animals left behind. William created Afton Robotics and purchased an additional property filled with the plushies and the Crying Child's toys. William takes costumes for the franchise that they were in the middle of opening, putting them on stands that would move around. Mix this with a gas that basically suffocates the patient, they would hopefully see the shadows lingering from inside of those stuffed animals. He starts by picking off the children shown in FNAF 4, but the experiments don't seem to be working. The last child he kidnaps is Rory, a 7-year-old, but instead, Rory seems to survive for a long while, thanks to William providing the children IV drops and medicine and everything that they need to survive. But William at this point is tired of none of the experiments working, and wonders if it's the delivery of the children's agony. After all, Crying Child was terrified of the animatronics, so perhaps if he built robots that were scary and kidnapped them, he could maintain that momentum. Meanwhile, around the same time, with the death of William's son and Charlotte Emily, Henry decides it would be better for the two of them to run to different locations, after being suspicious of foul play from William. This is when William designs the Funtime animatronics, inspired by his own family. After all, he has a facade to keep up, and nobody would question the choice to change his characters from the traditional Freddy's characters. William also gives the costumes from the Nightmare experiments to Fazbear Entertainment for the newly opened Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. What they didn't know was that the agony left behind in those plushies had leaked into the costumes, allowing for pieces of the crying child to exist in all 5 of them. After Circus Babies opens, before any of the animatronics can truly be used, William's daughter Elizabeth is grabbed by Circus Baby. In an attempt to cover up his experiments, William leaks the gas from the chambers into the location and blames the death of his daughter on them. But wouldn't William know it, but the Circus Baby animatronic had changed. She had been the 3rd successful possession, and William finally realized what it was. They needed a host. This leads William to making his way over to Freddy's and using one of the spring-lock suits in the back, a spring Bonnie suit. The first person to discover the suits are being moved is Henry, making a false report to management about a spring-lock incident at a sister location, convincing them to lock the suits away. Unfortunately, William manages to get to 5 children, take them to the back, and stuff them into the costumes before they can even seal the room. The marionette that had been lying back there, after all the thing was rusted, still containing the soul of Charlotte, ends up giving the children a gift, the gift of ignorance, to believe that they were simply playing a game, as to prevent them from attacking guests. But one of the children was not affected by the puppet's gifts. Cassidy was well aware of her situation, and only had one intention, to kill her murderer. But Cassidy could also recognize she had memories that were not her own. Instead, they were of another child, but the child didn't know who they were or what happened to them. Fast forward a few years, some changes to the hardware, and eventually ending up back in their original deathbed, Cassidy watches as someone who looks like William appears at the location, after her many attempts to kill him via the bite of 87 and the stuffing of the man from the week before, both of which she orchestrated. But this time, she would end him. Michael, of course, manages to survive, even spending an additional 2 days, but the week after, he begins to have nightmares. Nightmares of the room in a house he doesn't recognize, but with toys he does. Nightmares with his phone calls in the distance, but nightmarish, mangled versions of the characters he had just fought, as well as memories from his childhood, but they were warped. He remembers tormenting his brother, but he starts seeing perspectives he never could have had, as well as details like toys missing their beaks or the mangle on his sister's floor, all culminating back to that event when he took his brother's life away. This is when Michael realizes where these nightmares are coming from. These were coming from his brother. His brother was still alive. However, with Freddy's closed, his investigation has to end, but he still feels a shadow luring over him. William, now without a method to kill and kidnap children, thanks to Fazbear's being on the verge of bankruptcy, he decides to grab all he can, including those old robots. Perhaps if he shattered them like the crying child was, then they too would create these shadow agony beings. William returns to Freddy's, using Shadow Freddy to lure the children away, like he had to children years ago. He destroyed the robots, holding on to their endoskeletons to test on. After all, it's just the machines that these souls are tied to. He had even built a machine specifically built to split their pieces, known as the Scooper. But instead, when William came to retrieve his own costume, the children, including Charlotte, had appeared in front of him. The shadows he wanted had been created, just not according to William's plans. Scared, he climbs into his springlock suit. After all, they can't recognize him in a costume. He remembers that from working at Freddy's years ago. But Charlotte is tired of William being in the way, so instead she decides to give William a gift, and his springlocks go off, killing him. Instead, their agony attaches to William and the arcade machines and other things left inside of the safe room, as well as some other spirit seems to also be luring over William, but he's not important for now. Included in this agony is the crying child's over the pain of his birthday. Meanwhile, those pieces of remnant are brought to a location filled with agony, including that still inside of the Fredbear plush. Fazbear Entertainment maintains the location. After all, it's still owned by them, but at this point the machines contain pieces of the missing children, who still think they're playing a game, and what's left of the crying child's agony. After all, Yendo shows up in the Funtime auditorium, which is Funtime Foxy's room, a character believed to be inspired by Michael. After 5 nights of spending time with them, the characters are all put together into one body, a body with only a mask, that being a mask with a birthday hat, a character that supposedly has a little of him inside every body, and also only has one eye open, the exact eye the masks in FNAF 3 still have a light inside of. Also, the only character we originally see appear in Custom Night, where the Fredbear plush is found, as well as cameras to the experiments created because of the Crying Child. Now, let's cut over to Five Nights at Freddy's 3. Hudson is directed by RWQ to help play the arcades at Frights, which are affected by the agony of the MCI and the Crying Child. Thanks to him, the pieces are in place for the Crying Child and the MCI to finally move on. With everybody supposedly moving on, Cassidy makes one final attempt to kill William, having the place burned down, but none of their spirits are able to fully move on, as the pieces inside of the Ennard remain, keeping them locked to Earth. Ennard, after scooping Michael, would eventually end up escaping him and splits from Elizabeth, leaving Crying Child in control of what's left. He ends up becoming the character known as Molten Freddy, which again is just a mask, but this time of Freddy. What an interesting choice of mask. This character proceeds to talk about one big happy family, and being happy he can join the party. One could take this as the fact that this is just him referring to being in Michael's body, but why then leave Michael's body to begin with? Could they not just throw up specifically Elizabeth? I think they wanted to be free. After all, they never attempted to climb into another human. It could also be sarcasm, but one of his lines sounds dead serious. This would bring the Afton family back together, the Emily family as well, or at least the ones that matter, and also neutralize the metal keeping the MCI around. Finally, Crying Child is given the chance to finally move on from his fate, with all of the pieces put back together, just like Fredbear said he would. I've rambled for too long. I'll see you all again soon. Matane.